Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a Q&A episode, and I have three questions I want to dive into. But first, before I do that, I just want to go over a few ways you can help support the podcast. So first, if you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find this podcast. And again, I appreciate everybody who listens. There with that. Next, I have my free masterclass on body recomp, what it is, how to do it. And I also have my free masterclass on nutrition periodization. Again, what it is, how to do it, the different phases as well with that. And the links to both of those are in the show notes. And then if you haven't yet, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff. That's where I'm most active. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me on there, send me a DM. And I'm just one DM away there with that. And I love answering questions. So any you have. And then also with these Q&A episodes that I do, I also will take three from that and answer them on here as well too. And just a little bit more detailed if that's something you're interested in. Definitely follow me there and send over some questions. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's question. So the first question I have is, let me pull it up. How fast should the scale jump the first few weeks of a lean bulk? So I think first, I think we need to get away from should it. There's not going to be should with it. I think it's going to depend. And again, there's going to be a lot of noise potentially. But I do think it's very dependent on the individual. And so what I mean by that is there's a few things. So first, it's dependent on the individual and the context of what you're doing. So let's talk about the individual. Some people have a higher propensity to gain more water weight when they start this, but then some people, they don't. I've seen it multiple times where for some clients, we add some calories in and they gain X amount of water weight. I see some clients where they don't gain any and some people lose, right? It just really depends on the individual. And that's just so individual with that. It's going to depend on, and like I said, it's going to depend on the context of what you were doing before. So were you at maintenance, right? So with maintenance, you're obviously going to have more calories. Were you in a deficit before this? The size of the deficit is going to matter, right? The larger the deficit is, and then you go straight into a building phase, you might see a little bit more water weight gain because of that, right? Because you have that like larger delta from where you're going, right? So again, like what you were doing before is going to be super important. Were you in maintenance? Were you in a deficit? And then to take it a step further, what was the size of that deficit? How lean you are as well too. That's going to be another thing there where the leaner you are, to me, the higher, again, it's also going to depend on the size of the deficit and everything too, but your leanness is going to matter. So the leaner you are and the more you increase your calories, to me, the higher the likelihood of more weight gain, water weight gain, obviously, in that kind of initial couple weeks there with that. How long you were, if you were in a deficit, how long you were in that deficit, that's going to impact things. As I dive into this more, I am going to go over things that can cause your water weight to vary from day to day. But really, to start this out, it's just going to be really dependent on your context and the individual there with that. But basically, there is a lot of noise initially. And so this is where I do want to dive into the what can cause your water weight to change from day to day. So again, say you're starting a building phase. Again, whether you went from maintenance or if you went from a deficit, either way, in this initial couple weeks, a lot, and this happens in a fat loss phase too, where anytime you have these changes in calories and goals, there's going to be like the first couple weeks is just noise, right? We have these recommendations of, oh, in a fat loss phase, you want to be around like 0.75% of body weight per week loss. In a building phase, you want to be at like 0.25% of body weight gain per week. And people will take that and that first week, they decrease their calories a ton and they drop a ton of water weight and they're like, oh, I'm way ahead of schedule. So then they change their calories. Again, that's a mistake. Those first couple weeks are just going to be some noise. But then same thing with the building phase, people will change their calories and they see it jump up maybe a little bit too much in that first week or not enough and they make an adjustment. But we got to give it a couple weeks here initially just because there's a lot of noise that's going on. So again, with this, I just want to go over why your scale fluctuates from day to day and understand that any change from day to day, it's just water weight fluctuations, tissue gain or tissue change. So muscle gain and fat loss, which is ultimately what we're trying to go for. It happens on a much longer time scale. It's not going to happen on a day to day. So that means that any changes that you make from day to day based off of that is a little bit of an overreaction. With this, to counteract some of this, I have clients take their scale weight 3 times per week, first thing in the morning, post bath, post bathroom, and pre food or drink. And then I take the average for the week, and then I see where their weight is trending over multiple weeks. Again, understanding that these first couple weeks of changing from a phase to phase, there's going to be a little bit of noise there with that. But anyways, let's talk about what can cause some water weight fluctuations. So the first is going to be sodium and carb intake. So days when you have more sodium or carbs is going to cause your body to potentially retain more water the following day, which means you're going to have higher scale weight. So again, if we take it from a building phase perspective, where maybe you're eating less calories, now you're eating more carbs to get more calories in, you're going to see an increase in water weight, right? So again, if you were to make any change based on that, you're going to that's going to be an overreaction there. Again, fluid intake, obviously, if you are drinking a little bit more water, that could obviously do it. Now, again, I don't think you're when you go from a maintenance or fat loss phase to a building phase, I don't think you're necessarily going to be increasing your food intake. But again, maybe you are because you're eating a little bit more. So now you're a little bit more thirsty. So you have a little bit more water. Digestion, food volume. So if you have more food overall in your belly at any one time, you're going to see your scale weight increase from just having more food in your belly, right? It's not muscle gain, it's not fat gain, it's just you have more food in your GI tract there. So again, that's going to be something that's going to cause an increase with that. Sleep and stress is going to play a role. Activity levels could be playing a role as well too. Certain phases of your menstrual cycle as a female, if you are menstruating, that's another kind of layer in complexity here that could cause some water weight noise in the first couple weeks, right? If you have this, it's like you're ending your fat loss phase, going into a building phase, and you do all these things, but then on top of it, you're in the phase of your menstrual cycle where you'll see your water weight increase. And that typically happens right around the luteal phase is typically when you see this. So again, if you have that, boom, that's another thing there with that. So again, as you can see, there's going to be a lot of potential noise here with this. So in saying this, it's hard to give an exact number of how much somebody's body weight will go up when they start a building phase. But understand that there is going to be some noise initially. And in those first couple weeks, you really just want to play it out and let's see what happens over that period of time. Again, if you continue to see that same amount of weight gain week over week, okay, you do need to make some adjustments. If you keep seeing your weight trend down in those first couple weeks, you need to make some sort of adjustment there. Because again, like I said, some people will see their weight decrease when they get more calories, which again, more has to do with like maybe taking some stress off the body. Maybe they're moving a little bit more than what they think. Again, that's less, it's more rare for that to happen. But again, just to get my point across, like it can potentially happen, but again, it rarely happens. So anyways, what does this all mean? I think you can expect anywhere from 0 to 5% of weight change in that first couple of weeks there. And again, you just have to understand that it's just water weight change. It's not that you're eating too much. It's not that you're gaining a ton of body fat. It's just all these things that I talked about that are going on, right? You're probably going to be eating more carbs. So you're going to see your scale weight go up because you're eating more food. You're going to see your digestion or your digestion's not, shouldn't go down. It's just, you're going to have more food in your stomach at any one time there with that. So just keep that in mind. So anywhere from 0 to 5%, if we're talking you're 150 pounds, we're looking at, it could fluctuate anywhere up to 7.5 pounds, right? In those first couple weeks from that. So just keep that in mind. And again, it's all water weight there with that. Unless from there, going into a building phase, what we typically want to see from there is about 0.25%. So about 1% per month. So again, if we're taking that same 150-pound person, we're looking at about 1.5 to 2-ish pounds per month that we want to see there with that we want to see that trend over months, right? Again, not week to week, but again, we're just making sure we're getting past those first couple weeks, understanding that there's going to be some noise. So really to sum it up, it's really hard to say. And this is where I think if you're going into a building phase for the first time, it can be super helpful to have somebody look over this with you, because you can get yourself into some trouble here if you overreact to those first couple weeks there with that, whether that be now you just cut your calories and then you're not eating enough, or maybe you just go back to fat loss numbers, right? Whatever it may be. Again, it can be challenging to stick to it when you see that number go up a little bit more than you would want there with that. So hopefully that answered that. Again, if you guys have any questions on this, you can always send me a message on Instagram, and I'd love to follow up with anything you need me to clarify or anything like that. All right. So my next question is, not very good at auto-regulating rest times. Any ideas to help? So I like this because a lot of times people will ask, how long should I rest in between my sets and whatnot? What's the optimal time there? And I know in the research they show that for hypertrophy, muscle growth, when you want to build muscle, resting longer is probably better, right? You just really don't want to go in under recovered. People will sit there with their stopwatch and make sure they rest for X amount of time. And I think that can be a viable strategy, but ideally we would auto-regulate this, right? We would make sure that I found with clients, it's better to auto-regulate it, right? Versus being like, oh, hey, I have to rest for X amount of time. But this is definitely something that's very easy to overthink. And so I have some things that I look at here with this. It's going to depend on how you feel, but also I think it's going to be dependent on a few other things, and I'll dive into what that is. So I think, what are some good rules of thumb here? So again, I think when it comes to building muscle, most of the time you want to rest enough to where you feel recovered and not like under recovered to where it's going to impact your sets following those first sets, right? So again, some things to look at. If you're still breathing heavy, okay, you're probably not in you probably need to rest a little bit longer. So look at that. So again, if you take any exercise, let's say you're doing a leg press and you're resting for 2 minutes and you're still breathing super heavy, okay, maybe you rest a little bit longer there on that. So look at that. How do you feel mentally? Are you ready for the next set? Again, if you're still like, man, I'm still just feeling it mentally, okay, you probably need to rest a little bit longer there with that. Because again, you can imagine that if you're not ready mentally, you're probably either it's not going to be there, you're not going to be able to push as hard. Who knows? Again, you're going to be at a higher risk of injury as well because technique might not be there. But then also look at the target muscle. Is that ready? Let's just take back squat. You're doing the back squat and your quads are still like just super feeling it and you need a little bit longer. And again, like that would be another thing there where I'm like, okay, I need to rest a little bit longer. But you could even look at like assistant muscles as well too. So like in the back squat specifically, say you're doing that and it's like your low back still feeling a little weak. Okay, hey, you probably want to rest a little bit longer there with that. And don't worry, I'm going to get to what do these rest times look like. But it's also dependent on the exercise. So I think taking this into consideration, like also looking at which exercise you're using. So again, the rest times on a leg extension is probably going to end up being a little bit less than on a leg press. Rest time on a dumbbell lateral raise is probably going to be a little bit less than it would be on a dumbbell bench press. So I think it's exercise dependent as well too here on this. So looking at which exercises you're doing. Now, again, some of these things are still going to apply, right? Are you breathing heavy? Do you feel ready? Where's the target muscle at? But again, like how do you really need a rest for X amount of time for a dumbbell lateral raise, right? Whether people say it's 3 minutes or whatever it is. Again, we can probably auto-regulate this to save some time in the gym and just make our workouts more efficient. I also think it is dependent on your goal as well, because there are going to be some times where we do want to get some incomplete rest time, things like mile reps, drop sets. With those, you're probably going to you want to be under recovered, right? That's where you would have a specific rest time, probably. For example, on drop sets. Drop set, you're going to go straight into the next set in most cases, unless obviously it's specified otherwise. So with that, you're probably still going to be breathing slightly heavy. The target muscle might not fully be ready on that. So again, that would be a time that it would change. Again, mile reps, you're going to rest for 15 to 20 seconds. So you might not be fully ready. You might not hit all these things, but most of the time we want to have these three things before we do our next set, at least most of the time there with that. And again, otherwise, if you don't have like incomplete rest protocols that I do utilize with clients from time to time there with that. And again, it's usually time efficiency things to get more volume in a short amount of time. So what does that kind of leave us with? I think typically for building muscle, you're going to be looking at anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes, right? That's going to be that sweet spot. And then from there, you can look at these other three things I talked about. Breathing heavy. Do you feel ready? Is a target muscle ready? There with that. And you can adjust based off that. So again, if you're still breathing heavy, the target muscles are still feeling the last set, and you don't think you can do another set, then you likely need to rest a little bit longer, or maybe you need to just do a little bit more cardio. So again, if you are finding that it's like, hey, I've been like resting for 2 to 3 minutes and I'm still not going as quick as I want, you might need to look at doing a little bit of cardio here, adding in some cardiovascular training so that way you can recover a little bit quicker in between sets. But again, you're going to look at 1 to 3 minutes. But now if we look at this from an exercise standpoint, again, a dumbbell lateral raise, you're probably going to be closer to 1 minute. A leg press back squat, you're probably going to be closer to 3 minutes, right? Because they're just using more muscles, larger muscles and whatnot there with that. So I think really those are the things to look at and understand that you're likely overthinking what you need to do here, right? It's not going to be perfect. Again, so long as you're progressing over time, that's the big thing. And if you can improve your recovery a little bit in between sets, that's great. Do that, follow these things, but also maybe do as well if you're finding it's taking you a really long time to recover in between sets. So hopefully that was helpful there with that. And then my last question is how to structure a specialization phase. I think I like this question. I've gone over it multiple times. So if you want a little bit more of an in-depth discussion, I've done a podcast with Brian Borstein on it. I'm going to have Josh Cullen on here in the next, I think sometime in April. It's March now. So next month sometime I will have Josh on. He's a big proponent of this. I'm actually doing a specialization phase on right now with my back and sorry, I'm trying to find the episode number here with not my back. I was trying to do back, but then I injured I didn't injure my back. I injured my shoulder, teres major-ish area, which I couldn't do any lat pull down. So I was doing a lat specialization phase. So I'm not doing that now, but now I'm doing a chest, bicep, and delt specialization focus phase. And so really it's just basically a training cycle where you just prioritize those muscle groups, right? You maybe do a little bit more volume. I'm going to talk about how to do it. But again, you're just prioritizing those muscle groups, right? So this can be something that you just want to see improve. It could be a weak body part, whatever it is, right? Like it's, oh, hey, this is a little bit weaker. I do everything evenly. I've been doing everything evenly for 3+ years now. And it's, hey, my biceps just seem a little bit smaller. All right, well, we can maybe run a best specialization phase. Or maybe you just want to, in my case, bring up your upper body, your delts, your biceps, your chest, right? The glamour muscles. then you would do a specialization phase on those. So there's multiple ways that you can do this. What I will say on this is I don't think you need to go straight into this. I would give it a couple of years of training everything consistently. And again, with progressive overload, good hypertrophy protocols. And then from there, you can start to maybe add in some of these specialization phases. I think it was, okay, so I had to pull up all the episodes. So that's an overview of what it is. I did talk to Brian on episode 375 about it, 297, and then slightly talked with Josh and Zach Robinson from Data Driven Strength about it. But again, we're going to have a full episode on it here shortly. So if you want to check out those episodes, I don't know if I told you which episode that was with Josh, 249 with that. So those would be the three episodes to look at there with that. But anyways, let's talk about how I would structure this. So first, decrease volume on other muscle groups. So I think a lot of times the first thing people do is, oh, hey, let's just hammer away at whatever muscle group you want to, like, again, you want to do your biceps. All right, let's just throw in a ton of bicep work. Again, I think something like biceps, you got to think about like the cost of doing biceps, and it's probably pretty low. So you could probably throw in just more volume to biceps. But I think the smart move is to decrease your volume on other muscle groups that you don't want to improve, or maybe is a little bit more receptive to training. For example, for me, legs are a muscle group that I don't necessarily want to bring up anymore. They're also very responsive to training. Therefore, I can bring them close to maintenance, and I'm totally fine with that. So decreasing that volume there on those can be super helpful. So that'd be the first thing I would do and look at is, okay, where can I maybe decrease some volume at? From there, you can increase the volume on the muscle groups you want to specialize in. So again, in this example, in my chest, delt, and bicep specialization phase, the volume on that stuff is increased, and then things like legs, lats, and triceps are much lower, right, in terms of their volume. So those are two things there. And also, I guess this is a good point to bring up real quick too, because I said three muscle groups. You can do anywhere from 1 to 3 muscle groups at one time. So it doesn't necessarily have to be 3, it doesn't have to be 2, it doesn't have to be 1. It's up to you there on that. I think it does depend on which muscle groups, right? I don't think you're going to be able to do like back, chest, and like a quad focus, right? Like that's just like really big muscle groups. So I think you would have to like 2 of those there with that. So again, just understand it. It does depend on the muscle groups, but I think anywhere from 1 to 3 is fine. So again, decrease volume on the other muscle groups, increase the volume on the muscle groups you want to specialize in. You can also increase the intensity on the target muscle group. So train closer to failure on those. So again, bring it back to mind. We're increasing the intensity a lot quicker. So getting closer to failure on those muscle groups, but then we're also not really increasing the intensity too much on either not as much or much slower on those other muscle groups, right? So lats, upper back, triceps, all leg muscle groups, like those are further from failure, and they're going slower as we get closer to failure. So again, it doesn't have to be the same across the board. All my upper body stuff, it's just a slower progression to 0 to 1 RER. But then like legs, we're still like keeping a couple reps in the tank there with those most of the time. So that's how we do that. So you can increase the intensity of the muscle groups that you want to improve. You can also increase the frequency. And again, this may be something that you have to do. If you're increasing the volume on certain muscle groups, you may just have to increase the frequency because of that. So for example, if you're going to do 20 plus sets of one muscle group, it's going to be hard to squeeze that into 2 sessions. You could do it, but it's going to be hard. So you might split it up into 3, right? So frequency can be a way to get more volume in. And again, there's no magic to frequency for muscle growth. It's just, again, a way to get in more volume, which in turn could be that, hey, now frequency is something that works. But the key is that it increases your training volume. It's not the frequency itself. Now, when we talk about strength, that's a little bit different. Strength has been shown to, if you want to improve your strength on, say, a back squat or deadlift or something like that, training it more frequently can be a tool that you can utilize, and the frequency itself can help. Whereas muscle group or for hypertrophy, when we're training to build muscle, frequency itself doesn't seem to do that. For example, if you train a muscle group 3 times a week versus 2 times a week, but in each one you're training the same amount of volume, like you're doing, let's say, 15 sets each, you're not going to see any extra muscle growth from doing those 3 days because the volume's the same. Now, you could do some of these things, like I'm jumping the gun here a little bit, but again, that's not itself going to increase muscle growth there with that. But now if you can, in those 3 days, squeeze in, now you can do 20 sets versus 15 sets, that might be more viable strategy to build more muscle because you're getting in more volume there. And then lastly, the other thing you would do here is train whatever muscle groups you want to improve, at least train them first at least 1 to 2 times throughout the week. Your training, like delts could be one where typically that's not where you would place first in a training session, or biceps. But again, you want to grow those, you want to specialize in those. Training them first at least once or twice a week is a great way to do that. So for example, I train biceps first twice a week, right? So I'm training biceps before back, which again, you would think like, oh, back's a bigger muscle group, we need to train that first. But for hypertrophy, again, training it first can be a strategy that you can use there with that to prioritize it. So these are all different things you can use. You don't necessarily have to drop the hammer on every single one. You can, but these are all things that you can do to specialize, right? So again, just to bring it back to how I'm doing this. And actually, I'll bring up a client with glutes. I think that will be a good one for people to see. So obviously I'll do my example and then I'll do the client with her glutes. So for me, again, some things that we're doing here are decreasing the volume on lower body training and back stuff and tricep. And then we're increasing volume on biceps, delts, and chest. Again, those are the three that I'm specializing in. We're increasing the intensity. We're training closer to failure on those muscle groups. And then the other muscle groups are slower to get to 0 to 1R, or they're not getting close to 0 to 1R. We didn't increase the frequency actually, so not increasing the frequency there with that. However, I am training biceps first 2 times a week, and I'm training chest first 2 times a week, which is a more natural muscle group to train first. Delts actually aren't getting trained first at any point, but that's because I'm doing 3 muscle groups versus just like 1 or 2 there with that. So for my client, Sarah, she is doing a glute specialization phase. And so with that, one of the things we did is slightly decreased her upper body volume, increase the volume on her glutes specifically, increasing the intensity. I'm keeping it fairly similar throughout. I didn't necessarily change that, but we are making sure she is training close to failure for her glutes. We did increase the frequency. So instead of 2 glute training sessions, we're doing 3. So she'll be doing her glutes on day 1. She does her glutes on her 3rd workout of the week and the 5th workout of the week there. So again, increasing that frequency from there with that. And then she's also training her glute first twice per week as well. So that's how we are structuring that in a way to lay it out there with that. So let me know if you have any questions on this. That's it for this episode, and I will chat with you next time.